Thanks so much for joining me for tonight's set of scary stories. Remember, we post longer videos 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. We read 30 minutes or more of stories, then an hour or more of rain and nature sounds. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, because we are always happy to get suggestions for new story ideas. If you enjoy this voice, please tap the like button and leave a comment letting me know what voice style you want to hear next. With that, let's get on to our night of terror and dreams. Hollow Creek Tower is a slow-burn atmospheric horror story that explores the dark, dangerous pull of curiosity and the price we pay for it when two ambitious content creators, Victoria and Adam, hear about a supposedly haunted outlook tower in the remote mountains of Hollow Creek. They see it as the perfect opportunity to make their next big video. Desperate for that viral moment, they leave their car behind and trek up the mountain to explore the eerie, long-abandoned tower. But what begins as a quest for content soon turns into a nightmare, as the mountain itself seems to come alive, twisting reality and pulling them deeper into its suffocating grip. As Victoria becomes increasingly mesmerized by the strange energy of the tower, Adam finds himself trapped in a race against time, realizing too late that the mountain has plans of its own. The more they film, the more they unravel the terrifying truth. The tower doesn't just haunt the land, it owns it. Is the lure of social media fame worth risking everything? Can Adam escape the twisted force of Hollow Creek, or will he too become a permanent part of its chilling legacy? Step into the dark mystery of Hollow Creek Tower, where the line between reality and terror blurs, and where the whispers of the mountain may be the last thing you ever hear. Hollow Creek Tower. Part 1. The Hike. The mountain loomed in front of us, dark and foreboding, the dense forest below swallowing up the road like it had never been there. It wasn't even the kind of place you'd expect to find on a map. Remote, forgotten, untouched. The kind of place that seemed as if it didn't want to be found. And yet, here we were, standing at the base of Hollow Creek Mountain, the two of us, Victoria and me, itching for the next big thrill, the next big thing to blow up on Instagram or YouTube. Think it's haunted? Victoria asked, her voice cutting through the silence, her camera already in hand, aiming it at the tower that stood just out of sight, peeking above the tree line. The wind swirled around us, bringing with it a strange damp smell. I could already feel the weight of the air pressing down, like the mountain was holding its breath. Who cares if it is? I said, glancing at her. You know it'll get views. Victoria grinned. Yeah, but haunted content's always a hit. People love the suspense, the mystery, the thrill. She gave her camera a little wiggle, and I couldn't help but feel that familiar rush of excitement, the kind that comes with chasing the next viral moment, the kind that made us who we were. Creators, content chasers, anything for the next click, the next follow, anything for a bigger audience. But as the excitement built, something inside of me, some small, quiet voice, whispered that maybe, just maybe, we were pushing it too far this time. You see, the Hollow Creek Tower wasn't your run-of-the-mill haunted place. The stories surrounding it were different. People disappearing, strange lights in the sky, whispers on the wind, rumors that the mountain was cursed. People claimed they'd gone up to the tower and never come back, and no one had filmed it. Not a single person had managed to get a video to the outside world. But Victoria had insisted. We'd heard the story on some obscure podcast, and the more we dug, the more we were convinced that this was the one. The next great viral hit. I swallowed that feeling. What are you, scared? I asked myself. This was what we did. This was what we lived for. The hike was only 5 miles, but the climb was steep, and the sun was setting quickly. The sky overhead was a bruised purple, streaked with orange and gold, like someone had taken a paintbrush to it and rushed to finish. Behind us, the car sat at the base of the mountain, alone now, a tiny, insignificant speck on the empty stretch of road. Our phone service had already fizzled out by the time we'd passed the last cell tower. Perfect. We'd been walking for almost an hour when I first noticed it. A strange buzzing sound, like a low hum, coming from the trees. It wasn't the wind. It was almost mechanical, like electricity, like a current running through the air itself. Victoria, ahead of me, didn't seem to notice, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. "Vicky!" I called out, my voice cracking slightly. She glanced back over her shoulder, pausing for a moment. "What? Did you hear that?" I asked, my eyes scanning the trees. There was nothing there, just a blur of dark trunks and creeping shadows. She frowned, but then shrugged. "It's probably just a power line or something. It's nothing." Yeah, probably nothing. But the sound lingered in my ears, a distant hum that didn't belong in the woods. We kept walking, and the forest grew thicker, the trees twisting higher above us, their branches clawing at the sky. The ground beneath our boots turned from dry dirt to slick mud, the kind that held onto your shoes with a stubborn grip. The air was colder now, and there was a strange, musty smell in the wind. It wasn't natural. And then, a few minutes later, we came to a fork in the trail. One path led up toward the tower, and the other veered into a darker part of the woods, hidden behind thick clusters of trees. I didn't know why, but I felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to take the left path, the one that veered off. It was almost like it was calling me. But I pushed the thought away, shaking my head. This was ridiculous. I wasn't some dumb horror movie character who goes off the beaten path for no reason. "Are we almost there?" Victoria asked, looking up at me, her camera still in hand. Her voice sounded faint, distant, and for a second, I thought I heard something else in it, an edge of fear maybe. But when I glanced at her, she was smiling, as if trying to convince herself, trying to convince me. "Yeah, about another half hour maybe. You doing okay?" She nodded. But then something happened that I couldn't explain. Something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up for real. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. Movement, something darting through the trees just beyond the trail. It was quick, too quick for a person. Something low to the ground, a flash of fur, or maybe just a shadow. But when I turned my head to get a better look, it was gone. I caught up to Victoria, my heart pounding, and whispered, "Did you see that?" She turned, her brow furrowed in confusion. "See what?" I looked around, but everything was still. The woods were dead quiet now. Nothing. Probably just a deer. But I wasn't sure. It didn't feel like a deer. And I was starting to feel like we were being watched. We pressed on, the last mile taking longer than I expected. The darkening sky stretched above us like a shroud, the trees blocking out what little light was left from the setting sun. And then, finally, we saw it. Hollow Creek Tower. It was just as eerie as I'd imagined. A crumbling stone structure, rising high above the trees, the metal observation platform at the top, rusted and barely standing. The wind howled as it whipped through the surrounding pines, and the tower creaked like it was alive, groaning under the weight of its age. "I don't like this," Victoria said, her voice low, almost inaudible, as if she were afraid to say it out loud. I didn't blame her. There was something wrong with this place, something in the air itself that didn't sit right. But we were here, and we weren't backing out now. This was it, the content we'd been dying to create, the story we'd been chasing. I turned on my camera, facing it at her. "This is it, Vicky. This is going to be huge." She nodded, but her eyes were scanning the tower with a nervous intensity. "Yeah, huge. But she didn't seem convinced. We began to walk toward the base of the tower, and that's when it hit me. The smell. It wasn't the musty, wet scent of the forest anymore. It was something different, something metallic, like rust mixed with something else. It was too late to back out now. I pressed record. We weren't alone. Part 2. The Tower. The closer we got to Hollow Creek Tower, the more the air seemed to press against us, as if it were thickening, suffocating. The trees surrounding the base of the tower grew taller, their gnarled limbs stretching out like skeletal fingers, casting long, twisted shadows that made the entire clearing feel unnatural. The wind was relentless, howling through the cracks in the tower's stone, sending a chill deep into my bones. As we approached the steps leading up to the base, the smell hit me again, stronger now, a rancid, coppery scent. It reminded me of blood. I looked around, my eyes scanning the area, but there was nothing. No animals, no birds. Just the silence that had settled like a weight. A heavy, oppressive silence that seemed to hum beneath everything, as if the land itself were holding its breath. Adam. Victoria's voice cut through the fog in my mind. She was standing a few paces ahead, looking up at the tower, her camera rolling. She wasn't filming me. She was filming the tower, like she was trying to capture some truth that couldn't be seen with the naked eye. "You good?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though my own nerves were starting to fray. She didn't answer right away. Her focus was entirely on the structure, her eyes narrowed. It was hard to tell if she was more fascinated or terrified. Finally, she turned to me, her expression a mix of concern and unease. "I don't know," she said, her voice trembling just a little. "This place feels wrong, Adam. It's like it's not supposed to be here." I nodded, trying to force down the tightness in my chest. "Yeah, well, it's definitely not on the tourist map, that's for sure." But I wasn't laughing. Neither was she. We stood there for a moment, both of us uneasy, staring at the tower that loomed over us like some ancient sentinel, watching, waiting. Its crumbling stone walls were covered in creeping vines, but the most disturbing thing was the way it seemed to pulse with life. Not literally, of course, but in the way it just felt like something was alive inside, something that had been dormant for a long time, only waiting for the right moment to awaken. I stepped forward first, instinctively reaching for the cold, rusted metal of the handrail as I began to ascend the steps. The tower's platform was just above, a rusted observation deck that seemed on the verge of collapse. The entire structure looked like it might fall apart at any moment, but I wasn't here for safety. I was here for content, and content we were going to get. Victoria followed close behind, her camera still trained on the tower, though her eyes flickered nervously over the surroundings. The steps creaked under our weight, each one groaning like it hadn't been walked on in decades. The rusted metal and stone didn't seem to be holding up well against time, and I could already feel the sickening sensation of vertigo as the wind pushed against me. Halfway up, I glanced over at Victoria. She had stopped. "Vic?" I asked, pausing and turning to face her. "You coming?" She didn't respond right away. Her eyes were wide, her gaze distant, like she was seeing something I couldn't. "Vicky?" I asked again, my voice edged with concern. She snapped out of whatever trance she was in and blinked rapidly as though trying to clear her head. I thought I saw something," she murmured, almost to herself. "What?" She shook her head, still looking up toward the tower, as if the answer was hiding somewhere within the shadows. "I don't know. Never mind. It was nothing." I wasn't convinced. I watched her for a moment, but the urgency to keep moving gnawed at me. We were so close now. "Come on," I said, forcing a smile. We're here to get the content. Let's finish what we started." She nodded, but there was a tremor in her hands when she adjusted the camera, and I could tell she wasn't entirely convinced. We made it to the top, and that's when the real horror began. The platform was small, barely enough for the two of us to move around. The wind howled around the tower, sending gusts of cold air that cut through my jacket. It felt like we were standing at the edge of the world, looking down at the vast, endless dark. The mountains stretched out before us, the forest below just an expanse of inky blackness, a void that swallowed everything in its path. I set up the camera, framing the tower against the backdrop of the darkening sky. But as I pressed record, something caught my eye. A flicker, a figure. It was faint, almost like a shadow moving against the trees, too quick to be a person. I blinked. It was gone. "Did you see that?" I asked, voice low. Victoria was already filming, but she didn't answer immediately. I watched her face as she stared into the darkening woods. She seemed distracted. I didn't know why, but my gut twisted with unease. Something was wrong, and I couldn't put my finger on it. "Vicky?" I pressed, stepping closer to her. "What's going on?" Her voice was barely audible when she answered. "I think I saw someone standing there, in the trees, watching us." My pulse skipped a beat, and I glanced toward the edge of the forest, where the shadows stretched like dark fingers creeping in our direction. But there was nothing, just the wind, the trees, the eerie silence. I wanted to laugh it off, tell her it was just her imagination, but I couldn't. I could feel it too, the presence. There was something out there, watching us. "Let's just finish this video," I said, trying to sound calm, to convince myself more than anything. But Victoria wasn't listening. Her camera wavered in her hands, and her gaze flickered nervously from the woods to the tower, and back again. The vibe in the air had shifted. Everything had changed. I turned the camera back to the tower, trying to force some normalcy back into the situation. But as I started to speak, I heard something. A noise, faint at first, but unmistakable. A whisper. It was soft, like a breeze, but there was something about it that made my blood run cold. It wasn't the wind. I could hear it distinctly now. A voice, low, unintelligible. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my throat dry, my heart pounding in my chest. Victoria didn't answer. Her expression was pale, her mouth slightly open as though she were about to speak but couldn't form the words. She was staring at something in the distance, her eyes wide and unblinking. I followed her gaze, and for the first time, I understood what was happening. At the edge of the platform, just beyond the rusted railing, a figure stood. Not a person, not a shadow. It was more like something trying to look like a person. Too tall, too thin, its limbs bent at unnatural angles, its head tilted in a way that made my stomach lurch. And its eyes were black, empty. I froze. The figure didn't move, didn't blink. It just watched us, its presence so heavy, so suffocating that it felt like the entire world had come to a halt. "What the hell is that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the pounding in my ears. Victoria's camera fell to the ground with a clatter, but she didn't seem to notice. She just kept staring at the figure, her lips trembling. And then, without warning, it vanished. Just like that. No sound, no movement. It was simply gone. "Vicky," I shouted, grabbing her shoulders, shaking her. "We need to get out of here, now." But when I turned to look back at the camera, I realized something. The footage was still rolling, and the image on the screen wasn't what I had seen with my own eyes. It was distorted, warped. like the camera was picking up something else, something that was never meant to be seen. And then the whispering began again. This time it was louder, closer. Part 3. The Whispering. The wind kicked up again, howling through the cracked stone walls of the tower. But it wasn't the wind I could hear now. It was the whispering, that soft, insistent voice, crawling into my skull and planting itself deep inside. It wasn't a single voice. It was a chorus, thousands of them, all murmuring in unison, incomprehensible and hollow. But even though I couldn't understand the words, I could feel them. I could feel their presence, pressing against my chest, like something living, something ancient. I shook Victoria. "Vicky, we need to go. Now." Her eyes were wide, but there was no recognition in them. Her face had gone pale, her lips trembling as she stared at the empty air in front of us, her body rigid. She wasn't hearing the whispers. She wasn't hearing what I was hearing. I took her by the arm, but she didn't budge. "Come on." I pulled harder, desperate, but she just stared, unblinking, as if her mind had become consumed by the whispers. "Vicky, please." The camera, abandoned on the ground, had caught something. I could see it flickering on the screen, distorted and static-filled. But I didn't want to look at it. Not now. Not after what we'd just seen. What I'd just seen. The figure. The thing at the edge of the platform. I knew what I'd seen. It wasn't a trick of the light. It wasn't my imagination. But when I looked back over my shoulder, I couldn't see it anymore. The area was empty, just the forest beyond us, still and black as night. The whispering grew louder. It was almost deafening now, pounding in my ears, rising like a crescendo, and it wasn't coming from outside anymore. It was coming from within the tower, within the walls, within the very ground beneath my feet. I felt a deep, gnawing panic rise inside of me. Something was wrong with the tower, wrong with this place. And the worst part was, I couldn't figure out what it wanted from us. It didn't want us to leave. It was making sure we couldn't. I pulled harder on Victoria's arm. "Vicky, listen to me. We have to get out of here. Now." She snapped out of it then, blinking rapidly, her pupils dilated, her breath coming in short gasps, like she'd just woken from a nightmare. What happened? What's going on?" I could feel the weight of the air pressing down on us, suffocating us, making it harder to breathe. But I wasn't about to explain. I couldn't. There were no words for what was happening. "We need to go," I said, my voice tight with fear. "We have to get down. Now." Victoria looked at the stairs. We hadn't even reached the top of the platform yet. Just a few steps more, and we'd have the full view of the mountain, the full shot, the content shot. But when she looked back at me, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Doubt, fear, and then something I hadn't expected. She started to move toward the top. "Vicky, no." I grabbed her arm again, pulling her back. "We're leaving." She yanked herself free, her face pale but determined. "I'm not leaving," she said, voice shaking, but with an edge of something darker, something fixed. "I need to finish the shot. This is it, Adam. This is the one. This is everything." I couldn't understand her. I couldn't understand any of this. This place, these whispers. It wasn't just a haunted tower. There was something wrong with it, and it had its claws in her now. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, to think. What would we do if we ran? Would we make it back to the car? Would we make it off this mountain at all? Every part of me screamed to leave, to run, but the other part of me, the part that had chased content, that had lived for the next big thing, was pulling me toward the shot, toward the tower, toward whatever dark, twisted thing was calling us. I wasn't sure which part of me was winning, but before I could say anything, I heard a sound. A scraping noise, low and metallic, coming from below us, from inside the tower. Like something, or someone, was dragging itself across the floor. Something was in the tower with us. I turned to look, and that's when I saw it. A shadow moving slowly through the door frame of the tower's lower level. It was long, too long, and it didn't move like a person. It was as though it wasn't a person. Its form was barely human, the legs too thin, the arms too long. It was the same shape I had seen earlier, the one standing at the edge of the platform, but now it was closer, moving deliberately toward us. My breath hitched in my throat. "Vicky," I whispered, but my voice caught, breaking on the last syllable. She didn't hear me. She was already stepping closer to the tower's entrance. "No," I whispered again, but my heart was racing, and I couldn't make my legs move. My body had turned to stone, my mind caught in a loop of dread. The shadow was drawing closer. I could hear the scraping sound again, that same metallic drag. The thing, it was making its way toward us, and with every second that passed, it grew larger in my field of vision. The air had grown colder, and I could see my breath now, small puffs in the moonlight. And then I saw it clearly. Its face. It had no face. Just empty, smooth skin where the features should have been. Not even a hint of eyes or a mouth. It was like it was unfinished, like it was still in the process of becoming something. Something horrible. My stomach churned, and a bolt of terror shot through my body. I grabbed Victoria's arm again. "Vicky, please, we need to go now." But she wouldn't budge. She didn't even flinch. She was still staring up at the tower, her eyes wide and fixated, as if in a trance. "It's beautiful," she murmured, almost in awe. "It's exactly what we need, Adam. This is it. This is it." It? What the hell was she talking about? I had no time to process it. The shadow was closer now. Too close. Without thinking, I grabbed her by the wrist and yanked her away from the tower's entrance, pulling her toward the steps. Her feet stumbled over the rocky ground, but she didn't fight me. She wasn't fighting at all. I glanced back. The thing in the tower had stopped. It was watching us, watching me. And for the first time, I realized something. The tower wasn't just haunted. It was alive. It had a pulse, a heartbeat, and I could feel it in the ground beneath my feet. The shadow moved again, its form stretching unnaturally, like it was pulling itself from the dark depths of the earth. And it was coming for us. I grabbed Victoria harder, pulling her with everything I had. "We have to run. Now." But even as I shouted, the words felt useless, because the moment the moon reached its peak, I realized what had been chasing us all along. It wasn't the tower that wanted us. It was the mountain. Part 4, the mountain's grip. The shadow lunged. It wasn't a smooth, fluid motion, like a predator chasing its prey. No, it was more like a snap, like a bolt of lightning suddenly fractured by the weight of the night. The figure didn't have to move fast. It didn't need to. It just was, all at once, like it had always been there, waiting to reveal itself the moment we turned our backs. I didn't see it coming. One moment, Victoria and I were scrambling toward the stairs, my hands gripping her wrist, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum. The next, something cold and sharp pressed into my back, like fingers made of ice had reached through the tower's crumbling stone, gripping me from within. I stumbled, almost falling forward. But Victoria was still beside me, her face pale, her eyes wide with that eerie, vacant look she'd had since we'd set foot on the platform. "Vicky," I shouted again, but my voice cracked, breaking apart like glass. I could barely keep my feet under me as the ground seemed to tilt, to shift, and a nauseating pull took root in my gut. The whispers were louder now, flooding my ears with static, and I couldn't tell where they were coming from anymore. The wind had stopped. The world had stopped. The shadow moved again. It didn't take a step. It just was there. Closer now. Impossibly close. The face, if you could call it a face, was still a blank canvas of smooth skin, but I could feel it watching me, studying me, as though it were gauging my every thought, every movement. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead. Adam. Victoria's voice, soft and distant, pulled me from the trance I had been slipping into. Her eyes were fixed on the thing, but there was something in her expression now, something darker. A glint of recognition? No. It was worse than that. It was like she knew the thing, like she was accepting it as part of her world. "I'm not going back," she whispered, her voice trembling, but there was no fear in it, just resignation. "I don't want to leave." "What are you talking about?" I hissed, panic rising in my chest. I pulled harder on her arm, yanking her toward the stairs. "We're leaving. We're getting the hell out of here." But she didn't move. She just stared at me. No, through me. And her hand reached out, almost without thinking, as if she were going to touch the thing, to greet it. "Vicky!" I shouted again, my voice raw, but she didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. I glanced back at the shadow. It was growing, stretching out into the night, its limbs elongating unnaturally, like it was pulling itself out of some dimension beyond ours. I felt a pressure on my chest. The air itself felt heavier. There was something wrong with the way the world was bending, like gravity was being warped by the presence of whatever this was. In a surge of desperation, I dragged Victoria by the shoulder, shaking her harder now, nearly throwing her off balance. "You have to come with me, Vicky. Please." But as I shook her, I felt the air shift around us. A loud crack echoed from the base of the tower, followed by a series of groaning noises, like stone being ground against stone. I looked down just in time to see a deep crack run through the foundation of the stairs, one that hadn't been there a second ago. The tower was moving, or maybe the mountain was. The ground shuddered beneath my feet. I looked up, and that was when I saw it. The thing was closer now, impossibly close, its grotesque form swelling as if it was feeding, growing larger with each passing second. It hadn't taken a step, but its presence had stretched itself until it was all around us, filling every corner of the tower, consuming everything in sight. Victoria's eyes shifted from the shadow to me, and for the first time, I saw the flicker of something not vacant, something that looked almost like awareness. She blinked, as if waking from a long, dark sleep. "Adam." Her voice was softer now, as if she were emerging from a fog. "I don't think we're supposed to leave." "What the hell are you talking about?" I demanded, yanking her forward again, trying to make her focus. "We're leaving. Now." She shook her head slowly, her lips curling into a faint, almost sad smile. "No, Adam. I think this is what we were meant to find." The whispering, the voices. They were inside me now, scratching at my skull like they wanted to get out. They weren't even words anymore. Just noise. An unholy buzz. I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. I felt the ground move again, stronger this time. The crack in the stone had deepened, spreading all the way up the stairs, and the whole tower groaned like a living thing. The shadow didn't speak. It didn't have a mouth, but somehow I could hear it. Its voice was part of the whispering, part of the hum that was eating away at my sanity. It was telling me something. I couldn't understand it. I didn't want to understand it. But as it grew closer, the air thickened, and I realized with a sickening twist in my gut, that it wasn't just inside my mind anymore. It had always been in there. It had always been whispering, waiting for the right moment, the right weakness, to make its presence known. Victoria reached out her hand toward the shadow. Her fingers were trembling, but there was no fear in her expression anymore. No hesitation. "Vicky, no," I shouted, but it was too late. She stepped forward into the darkness. In that instant, the world seemed to bend around us. The tower itself seemed to collapse, its ancient stone groaning and cracking, the ground shaking beneath us. I could feel the pull, like gravity was warping, twisting, sucking everything toward the heart of the mountain. I grabbed her arm with all the strength I had left. "Victoria." I pulled her back, but it was like trying to fight a tide. I couldn't move her. The thing didn't need to speak. It didn't need to do anything. It just was, filling every space with its presence, with its terrible, hollow pull. I looked back at the stairs. The path we had taken was closing. The stairs were crumbling, disintegrating before my eyes, as though the tower itself was erasing its own existence, drawing us into the mountain's heart. And then I heard it. A voice. Low, guttural, but not like the whispers. This was clear. "You should have stayed in the car." I turned. The shadow was still there, but now it was shifting. It wasn't a single entity anymore. It had multiplied, more of them, all around us, filling the air with their formless shapes. They didn't need bodies. They didn't need faces. They just were. All around us, everywhere, watching, waiting. And as the tower crumbled around us, as the mountain began to close in, one final thought pierced my mind, sharp and undeniable. We were never meant to leave. The last thing I heard was Victoria's voice, soft and lost in the chaos, almost as if she were speaking to someone, something else. "It's beautiful here, Adam. I can't go back." The mountain had claimed us. Part 5. The Hollow Truth. The ground trembled beneath me as the shadows closed in, a suffocating presence pressing against my chest like 1,000 invisible hands. The air was so thick now, so alive, with the wrongness of it all, that it felt as though it was crawling inside my skin, seeping into my blood, infecting my very soul. I wanted to scream, but the whispers swallowed every sound I made, their chorus of voices blending into a maddening cacophony. Stay with us, join us, it's beautiful here." Victoria's hand was still outstretched, reaching into the abyss, her fingers trembling but unyielding. She was no longer my partner, my friend. She was someone else now, someone caught in the same web that had taken root in the mountain. The woman I had known was gone. In her place was a stranger, someone who had accepted what was happening, who had embraced it. I yanked on her arm again, desperation flooding through me. My breath came in short, jagged gasps. "Vicky, please, please, come back." But she didn't move. Her eyes were vacant, but in them, there was also something else, something hungry, something drawn to the same terrible truth that the mountain was whispering into my bones. And that's when it hit me. It wasn't just the tower that was alive. It was the whole damn mountain. The more I thought about it, the more I could feel the realization crawling beneath my skin. It was like the mountain itself was a creature, feeding on whatever entered its grasp. It had been waiting for us to come to Hollow Creek Tower, waiting for us to get close enough to understand the truth. That truth was simple, brutal, and terrifying. The tower didn't lead out of the mountain. It led in. The deeper you went, the more it claimed you, pulling you into its hollow heart. You didn't leave Hollow Creek Tower. You couldn't. The moment you set foot on the mountain, you became part of it. The shadows around us began to shift, like tendrils of darkness reaching out to touch everything in their path. I could see them now, faint outlines of shapes, half human, half something else, their bodies warped and stretched beyond recognition. They were watching, waiting. They had always been there, hidden beneath the surface, feeding off the land, feeding off the souls who had the misfortune to wander too close. I turned back to Victoria, my chest tight with fear. "Vicky, you don't have to do this. We can leave. We can still make it out." But her expression didn't change. Her face was pale, but there was no fear in her eyes. No doubt. She was past the point of return. The mountain had already taken her. I glanced at the tower again, the structure towering over us like an enormous decaying beast. The walls were cracking, the stone shifting, the ancient rusted metal of the observation deck groaning under some unseen weight. It was alive. I could feel it now, pulsing with a terrible energy. Whatever force was drawing us in, it wasn't a force of nature. It was something older, something far darker. I could hear it again, the whispers, louder now, their words clearer, and they were coming from the ground itself, from the earth beneath my feet. "Come closer, join us, stay with us." And at that moment, I understood. I understood why people who came to Hollow Creek Tower never left. They never had the chance to leave. They were chosen. They were taken. The mountain fed on those who were desperate enough, curious enough to venture too close to the edge, the ones who sought the thrill of the unknown, the ones who couldn't resist the allure of something dangerous, something untouchable. And when they came, when they finally understood what they were up against, it was too late. The mountain had already consumed them. The darkness that surrounded us wasn't just in the tower. It was everywhere now. I could feel it pressing in on me, closing in on all sides. The air was thick with it, almost solid. And as I looked around, I could see the shadows, slowly but surely, becoming more like us. More like Victoria. More like the ones who had already been swallowed whole by the mountain. I had to get out. The instinct to run surged in me, a primal urge that screamed louder than all the whispers combined. But as I turned toward the stairs, I realized they were gone. The path I had taken was gone. The stone steps had crumbled completely, disintegrated into dust, as if the mountain had simply erased them from existence. The way out, the way I had come in, was closed. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I was trapped. I turned back to Victoria, whose vacant eyes were now locked on me. She didn't move, but I could feel her presence there, pulling at me, urging me to join her. She didn't need to speak for me to understand. She had made her choice, and the mountain had made hers. In a final act of defiance, I turned away from her, from the tower, and looked toward the forest that surrounded us. There had to be another way out, right? There had to be a path through the trees, a road, something. Anything that could lead me back to the car, back to the world I knew. But the mountain had other plans. As I took a step forward, the trees seemed to move. No, not move. Shift. The ground beneath me groaned and cracked, the earth itself buckling as if it was alive. The trees were bending, twisting toward me, their bark creaking and splitting as they grew longer, their roots breaking through the soil like massive skeletal fingers. The forest wasn't just surrounding me, it was closing in. I looked behind me. Victoria was still standing in the same spot, still as a statue, her arms limp at her sides. She wasn't even watching me anymore. She was staring at the mountain, lost in whatever world it had pulled her into. And that's when I saw it. The eyes. They were staring at me from the darkness beyond the trees, cold and empty, like the eyes of 1,000 forgotten souls. They were watching me, judging me, waiting for me to understand, to accept it, to become part of the mountain, just like Victoria had. The whispers grew louder, and I could hear them in my bones now. Stay with us. Come home. I took another step forward, but the ground beneath me shifted, the earth trembling like the heart of the mountain was beating beneath my feet. The trees loomed over me, their branches outstretched like claws. I could feel their breath, cold and damp, against my skin. The shadows were closing in again, swallowing the light, and I knew, in that moment, that there was no escape. The mountain had won. I turned one last time to look at Victoria, but the moment I did, she was gone. The tower was gone. The forest was gone. There was nothing left but the mountain, and the whispers, and the truth. I was never going to leave. The mountain had claimed me too.